we used to stand round a hole in the middle of the hall, the floor, auditorium, and have attunements sometime. Okay, off we go. Somebody said, what was it like before we started? And this is the first attunement. Peter's on the left, and Rock with the trilby hat is right on the right, and Eileen's hiding out of sight. And almost immediately, because again Peter wanted it built almost in a couple of weeks, and so we brought in a digger, and his name was Mr. Slowey. And I don't think Peter was very happy with that.
Before we actually started construction, I'm going to tell a little story here, if you don't mind. One of the things that was discussed that was important was the orientation of the building on the site. And the question is whether the center line here was supposed to line up with south or with the power point on Cluny Hill. Well, Peter had just returned from a trip to California, his first trip to California, and he brought back with him a couple sensitives, Wayne and Bella. And Bella was supposed to come and check the alignment of the hall. So Angus and I had the instructions that it was supposed to line up with the power point on Cluny Hill. So we couldn't actually see it from here. So if you remember the slide here, the one just before, you'll see behind the folks there's this big sand dune there. So Angus got up on the tallest stepladder we could find on top of the highest point on that sand dune, and he then sighted a line that we put on the ground here and lined it up with Cluny Hill. He couldn't actually see Cluny Hill, I don't think, you could see Cluny Hill, you could see the tower, but we couldn't see the power point. So Bella came down to the site after we had laid the building all out, and I was a bit of a doubting Thomas about all this, and she walked around to all the various corners, and she first went to the center and sort of attuned and said, yeah, this is right. And then she stood about right over there, and she said, the power point's here. And we all looked a bit puzzled because we thought the power point would be right in the center. And she said, no, if the power point's in the center, the energy would be so powerful, you won't be able to build the building. And she said, here, try it and see for yourself. So Peter stood there. He nodded. Angus stood there, and he nodded knowingly. And Bella explained that you could feel it because the energy came from all sides to that one point. I stood there and sort of shrugged my shoulders, and we carried on, checking the various corners. And she worked her way around the building to over here, and here, and here. And finally, we ended up at that corner where we'd driven the stake in up there, just on that corner of the building. And there was a big mound going up there, so the stake was kind of up on the top of the hill. And she stood there and she said, at the other one, each one, she said, this is fine, perfect. And she said, I think when you build a building, you're going to find the building's going to go out a little bit further than this stake. I went, gosh, we put all this work into getting this right. I'm sure we're not going to change it now. And we're going to start digging the hole tomorrow. And then I realized that we had measured uphill from this corner up there. And if you take that line down, it actually would go out. And it was based on that I realized this woman knows what she's talking about. I'm not quite sure why she came, but she certainly knew what she was talking about, and I just got on with what we had to do. Now, when we started the building, we had a delay because there was a cement strike. And so we ended up buying all the cement for the foundations and handling it ourselves about 3 times to take it off the lorry, store it on site, and then mix it into the concrete. And this is us doing that. The reason, we're not quite sure, but some people say to delay till Bella got here. Some people thought maybe it was so that we could put our love into the cement as well. And as we worked together, there were great parties every now and again when we'd have to bring in more concrete block. And the whole community would come out at about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning and help us move all these blocks and stack them in position ready to build the walls. And it was just a great event, young and old. Some of you might remember Stephen Field there. And then we'd all go down to CC for breakfast. And in this way, the whole community got to put their energies into every block that went up. One of the great things about starting the hall is getting to know the gentleman behind me there, Ian Ross. He was a local builder, and he had a crew of about 6 men, and he just stopped his business for a year and worked for us in helping us getting started and beginning to learn how to work with the materials, particularly the concrete block, and providing all the materials and suppliers we needed to get on with the process.
This is Michael Ogden on the left, again with Lyle, and I'm not sure where Michael came from. Partly he came from the United States. But people literally turned up, and he had the experience to take over the general day-to-day managing of the project. Here he is. Michael would often be found with his office on a pile of cement bags and a telephone. He didn't seem to need anything much. I don't know what he's on here. This is Shelley. Now, can anyone say something about Shelley now? Lyle.
Well, let someone else read.
Yep.
Basketball player, carpenter, builder, musician, now living in the Pacific Northwest region. Also teacher, I think.
Yeah.
Right. But he was just one of many people who arrived with the skills we needed when we were building to help us.
That's Roger Mostyn on the right, who always went around with a lovely cape, which you can see he's wearing there. And this is our little design crew. And that's Francis. Now, Francis was working in the printing department at the time, and Victor, who was focalizing the printing department, realized she needed to move over to construction. And nobody realized quite what she was going to do until we realized she was a brilliant modeler maker. And Peter and the core group had little idea what the building was going to be like from the drawings. And so we made this enormous model, and when I say it was big, it really was. And you'll see here, instead of a paved area, we had a pond in front. I don't know what the idea was, but that was one of our first ideas. And you can see at the back, the lantern up the top had a little spire. She made the roof literally like it is here. Every piece of wood was in that model. Another aerial picture of it. I'm sorry, this is really for my pleasure. I was so delighted that we had this model. I can tell you, designing it's one thing, but you don't know what you're doing sometimes until somebody makes a model.
Where is it now?
It got destroyed, unfortunately, in a storm, except we still got the roof. Now, at one time, we had a spiral on the top, but it was taken off, I don't know when, in the 80s, I think. I think that's when we had a crystal at one time, and it all came off. Now, we won't go into the details of that one, but however, maybe we will later on. But Richard Maxwell came. He was the man in the red shirt moving the blocks, and he came up with an idea. This is not long before we started building, that we would raise the roof of the hall and we'd have a clear story of windows all the way around. It threw me into complete chaos. It was a great idea, but I didn't know what to do. So the core group said, make models of all the different roof designs, and we will make a decision as to which roof. So here is the one with the raised clear story all the way around it. And Francis will tell you, I just abandoned it and said, okay, whatever happens, happens. Roger did this one with a sort of very simple roof. And this is basically the one that we've now got. And to my amazement, the core group decided on this one, which is the one we've got. But it was a very tense moment. Now, look around you and you see this, the ring beam, which is 5 big ring beams. And why I'm showing this to you is, again, the whole community had to come together, or many came together, to help us erect these. And here you'll see the beams arriving. They were made in Forres by us, but they had to come back from this workshop, and they had to be carried because we didn't have all sorts of mechanical equipment. In the back, there is Jim Pat, who was the first man who came, I think, from building Dallas Airport. Was it Dallas Airport?
Yeah, I think so.
And
Dallas.
he came from building this enormous airport to actually constructing the lower floor of this building. So we had some...
building silos to the Minuteman.
Yeah, I believe he was.
Yeah. But he knew all about reinforced concrete.
Yeah.
There's John Clawson on the right at the back, Michael Linfield, Johnny. Now you can see these are 40 feet long, and they were incredibly heavy to carry. And how many nails went into each one?
About
Thousands.
7,000.
7,000 nails.
502.86, I think, something like that.
But they were nailing for days. This is Elias, who came and did a lot of the stonework. And Lyle, of course, on the right. Yep, this is your roof.
So when the structural engineer showed us the design for the roof, I sort of scratched my head and said, well, I'm not sure how I'm going to build this. So after drawing it full scale 3 times on the floor, we built it on the floor, cutting and fitting all the pieces together. Jim Hill and myself did most of the cutting. We tried to include a few people in the process, but decided that most of the people, there's a friend here who was telling me last night that I demoted him from cutting beams to burning and brushing, and I may well have done that. Yes, Johnny. But he has very fond memories of the time he spent burning and brushing. I think one of the things that, again, this is a situation where we turned something that looked like a problem into something beautiful, actually. The wood arrived all rough sawn from Canada, and it was supposed to be planed or dressed here, but the beams were too big. They didn't have any machinery to dress them so that they would be smooth. And one day I was out in the shed beside the hall playing around. We had a blow lamp for doing something, and I was trying to brush out a piece of wood with a circular wire brush to see if we could brush some of the roughness off of it. And the wood was quite damp. So I just took the blow lamp to kind of dry it out a bit with the blow lamp and see if I could brush it better with this circular wire brush on a drill. And it worked a bit better. And I tried it again, and it started to go a bit charred, and it worked even better. And then I burnt it really black and then brushed it out. And we have what you see in the roof and everywhere on the beams throughout the building. So I then showed it to George and everyone liked it. And initially we were just going to do the main beams, but in the end every bit of wood that's in the roofs in the building have been burned and brushed. Again, we didn't have a lot of fancy equipment to lift things. That scaffolding there is about, well, it's standing right up there. That's what they're doing. They're putting those beams there up in place. And we had this long pole, as you can see there, that we fastened to the floor and braced off, and then we just had a pulley. This is the pole in the middle. See that beam going straight up? That was a 2 2x8s, 40 foot long, that were spiked together, and then we braced it off. We're standing up at this height now, around the ring beam. But there's the pole that we lifted everything up with. We didn't have cranes. The roof is basically, we have a pentagon, and going around the outside of this whole roof, there's a steel band that goes all the way around. It's 1 inch thick and 6 inches high, and it goes all the way around the outside of the roof. And then up here we have these beams that are like a compression ring at the top. And the whole roof is held in this sloped position by pushing out on the steel band and pushing in on that ring. So that keeps it there in suspension. Now, when we built the building, we had the tower in the middle to support the whole center, so the whole thing was just sitting there. My worry was, and you can actually see on the tops of the posts, there's some blocks of wood underneath the beams. My worry was that how were we going to let the roof settle down onto the steel band around the outside once we had the whole thing built, and how we were going to get the scaffold out of the center. So on a Friday afternoon, we finished putting the steel band around, and it was a beautiful sunny day like this, warm, and we bolted up the last section. And on Saturday mornings at the attunements, we always used to climb the tower and stand up there and have a look at the horizon and watch the jets fly by. And that Saturday morning, we started to climb the tower, and it was just swaying around in the breeze as we started to climb up. And we realized what had happened over the night was that the steel band had contracted as it cooled down and had just lifted the center of the roof right off the posts. This would have been about August 75. It was a great summer.
And the slide you showed that you built off the roof on the floor. Have you lifted all that feet up?
Yeah. How did we do it?
Yeah.
With a post standing on the floor going up, and then with a block and tackle on that. All by hand. Well, each beam was lifted separately. We set the centerpiece, and then each hip going down to each column was the next bit. And then the first main triangle in each of the 5 sections, and then just kept filling in. It took us 2 weeks to put it up once we had it all cut and fit together. Again, I think one of the things that always stood out in our mind as we worked on the building and discussed our working together was that we always felt that it was important that we put love and sort of personal, each person, people handling and putting love into the materials as we built it.
Following what Lyle has just said, there are a number of extraordinary miracles, or miracles to me. I produced some drawings, Roger and I, and Richard Maxwell when he came, but we never thought that a crew would say, yeah, we're game to do what's done to this timber. Now just look at that piece of wood and then go off and look at other pieces of woods in other buildings. And you'll find, as a result of doing what Lyle has described, the whole timber structure was first burnt and then it was wire brushed. I hate to think how many hours, days, weeks, months went into literally taking each piece of timber. And today I met a friend who's visiting here at the moment. She said her husband said he would go and help with the burning and brushing. And he got into all these goggles because it was a fairly dirty process. And he was beginning to think, how long am I going to take to complete this beam? It's going to go on ages and ages. And then suddenly, he heard Peter's voice say, work is love in action. Have I got it the right way around? Yeah. Work is love in action. And the next thing, he suddenly realized, hey, I finished this beam. Now, look on the left. There is one of the beams, totally charred and burnt. And here's Michael, who did an enormous amount of this work and seemed to just go on and on doing it. You can see the length of the beams. They're what? I don't know what lengths they are, but
they're 30 foot long.
They're 30 foot long, but the amount of wood that we did in this way, and to me it is a complete miracle that there were people here who came with that kind of love and dedication. So it was as though every piece of wood had a blessing. Now we're switching to the roof. This is suddenly we'd completed the roof and we had to tar it and make it waterproof. And Richard Valeriano is on the left. He usually did stonework, but he's got into tar making. Jeremy Bradford's on the right. That's me in the red shirt, etc. Rennie?
Yeah, coming in on the side.
Now, I'm not quite sure how this happened, but we had this crazy idea that we'd cover the roof with stone. There was a big argument that we should cover it with grass. But then a man came here, and this is how it worked. I never knew really honestly what I was doing. I just got on with what came to me. And he said, if you put onto the roof different layers of material, you will create what's called an orgon accumulator, which will focus the energy into the hall. And so underneath we've got a wooden lining, which you can see up there. On top of that, insulation, felt, more insulation, and then quartz stones into which the beach stones are laid. Again, it was another enormous operation, and the village of Findhorn got rather worried because they saw all the stones on the beach disappearing. The funny thing was, one day they said, look, you're to take no more stones off the beach. We were actually doing it rather quietly. We were just bringing little bags back for a while. But one day some clever chap said, I'm going down with a truck. Well, that was rather overdoing it. And the amusing thing was, okay, we were to take no more stones off the beach. And the funny thing was, that night there was an enormous storm, and every stone on the beach just went out to sea. There were no stones at all. We completed by using, I think, river stones. That's Russell on the left. You can just see the enormous amount of stone. I hate to think how many stones we put up there. Now I'm showing you this picture primarily because it's one of my favorites. It's almost like a Salvador Dali. Someday I hope somebody will do an oil painting of that, but that, of course, is the lantern which is up there. And I think you're in the middle there, Lyle.
Yeah, I think it was my wedding day, George.
It was your
Good morning.
I see, was it? This was primarily to show you that we worked late into the night. Now, this is another miracle. On the left is a wall which Ian Ross and his stonemasons, this is the builder who worked with us for about sort of up to 12 months, and he was very good at laying stone. And the only problem I gave him was that I said, I don't want to have any cement in the joints. We'll have the concrete cement behind holding it together. However, he did it, and he produced a very nice wall, very much sort of Forest style. However, along comes Richard Valeriano, and he says, well, can I try something else? And I don't know who agreed, but we said, well, why not? So, here's Richard, and for months he worked on the other walls. And the other walls are very, very different. Now, there's a sort of, I'm not very good at explaining these things, but to me, this is, the other walls rather like the way we educate people. Everybody's in squares and blocks. But this one's interesting because if you look at the stones blend together, they work together. In fact, sometimes they have fitted them so carefully that ridges, like mountain ridges, sort of flow across the joints. Andrew, what are you doing? He's lovingly fitting the stones together.
His fingers crossed.
His fingers have got I was just amazed at what was being done. I mean, I just didn't expect we'd have stone like this.
Richard was really into it. Richard.
That's Peter.
Richard was. The thing about Richard was that he just totally threw himself into these enormous enthusiasm, and he just fell in love and became totally overwhelmed with the idea of sculpture and being a sculptor.
Yeah.
And we would go and just choose stones by hand. At one point,
Yeah.
we'd be doing stuff, and we get to a certain point of it, and we go up to Elgin to find one or two stones just to fit in the right place, but nothing would suit him unless
Yeah.
the right thing happened.
Well, you remember Richard was also director of one of our first choirs, and he got people to sing, and I like to think he made the stones sing as well. Now, this is Dieter, who came from southern Germany, and he just said, I'm going one further. Now, for those of you who've seen Dieter's wall, which is the wall below the flue of the chimney, you cannot put a coin between any of those joints. It is so staggering that we've never had any press people come up to look at it, but it's like, is it ashlar? You know, where you make square stones and you fit them together with no cement, and they're just, well, this is the same. I'm not quite sure, that's not a particularly easy picture for you to see, but go out and have a look at it sometime and see if you can put a coin between the joints, and I'll be very surprised if you can. And it's not cement in the joints, it's just that he has literally fitted them together. Now, what I like to say is that you're seeing a process which can be parallel with humanity. The squares are the way very often we train ourselves. Everybody has to do what everybody else does. The second wall, we're learning to work together, and we're respecting each other, we're making space to allow. And this one is where we become one.
It took 18 months to do that.
Yeah, I believe he took
That
8.
corner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dieter arrived here out of college, never having done a thing with his hands in his life. And he worked for 6 months helping to put the glass in the foyer window, just doing the puttying, and just said, I want to do that.
And at times we didn't have the money to buy the stone, and Dieter was good at making beer, brewing beer. So he'd brew beer, sell it, and with the money he'd buy some more stone. Now, is that true or false?
That's true. That's true.
Good beer.
His other claim to fame was he was a proponent of garlic.
Yeah.
Cure for everything.
Ian, I didn't have time to check whether I've got this the right way up. But it's lovely anyway. You can't go around the building and look at the stone without seeing the amazing stonework, which at the moment Ian has faced the wall at the back of the hall. One day I hope, now that we own the land on Dunelands, that won't be the back. It'll also be seen. People will approach that way. But it's fantastic stone. It did terrify the building inspector. He wondered whether it was going to stay up. But look at it. It's sheer delightful sculpture. Thank you, Ian. Now, we're all sitting on this at the moment. I'm not really showing it just so that you look at the construction. It's really what's on the floor I want to show you. Now, this is another miracle. A Danish firm supplied the beach flooring, which we've now used for, 20-something years?
6.
Yeah, it's actually 28 years to the month since we started the building, because we started in July. The one thing they just could not believe, that it was possible to cut. First of all, let me explain. Up above you've got a pentagon, but down here we designed a floor which was a pentagram. And the timber comes together in such a way that it literally goes down to narrow little slithery points. And the Danish suppliers didn't think you could do it. But Lyle and others thought otherwise, and we dared to do it, and in 20 years no point has broken off. And so we've shown the Danish people another way to use their floor. Now that to me is another miracle. We did something they said you couldn't do.
It's 24 years.
24.
Because I remember Lyle and Michael and I lived in a caravan right next door. And Michael was just a couple of months old when they were building this, and they had 24-hour shifts. And of course, Lyle was on the night shift. And
No, it wasn't.
They were waking up at 4 o'clock feet and carrying music going.
Do you want to say
and
something
going.
about
They
this?
had to finish this floor in a huge hurry for a conference, I think. And yeah, it's 24 years.
You will. Lyle's going to... Come on, say it. Great.
That gap, I remember being in the hall when Pan appeared through that. Does anybody else remember that day? We were in the hall and that glass thing moved, and the next thing was Pan. You remember that? Somebody did that there.
It was in the middle of the 90s,
And it turned out to be Ian Turnbull.
Well, we're rapidly coming to the end of the slides. The next one is interesting because, as you all know, we had a crystal up there at one time, and I could never understand how it fell down. But it crashed down, and that's what it did. It made a large hole in the glass panel. And the miracle was, there was a group, I believe, standing around underneath, and it fell down in the middle of them. If it had hit one of them, it would have been catastrophic, but it didn't. However, the crystal's another story. Now, here's Elfrida. Again, you're sitting on seats here. We didn't bring in a crew to make the seating. We did it ourselves. And Elfrida brought around her. Fred Barton's wife, Rowena, was working with her. I think Francis was working. Anyone who could sew, sewed.
That's Maria.
You're right, it's Maria behind. And the seats are made of steel, wood, foam and fabric. And I remember Harold Armstrong did all the metalwork, and Gary did the wood, and the ladies did the upholstery. Now this is delightful. You're looking at two pictures at the back here, and that's Hayden Stubbings, who I think is a nephew of Ross Stewart, and on the left is Mimi, who's just told me she's coming to stay with me and Francis in November for the birthday. Now, this is an amazing story. I remember going all the way to France to get the canvas. For some reason, we didn't think we'd let them deliver it, so we just happened to be down there, and we crossed the channel, and we came back with these enormous lengths of canvas. I don't think there are any other paintings in the world, apart from the Vatican, where none of them are as big as these. Now, the extraordinary thing was, Hayden was moving. He worked in New York, he worked in London, he had exhibitions in Germany, and he decided, no, I'm going to paint you these two enormous paintings. Another miracle. The way it was done was, Mimi was here for about 3 or 4 years, and once a year they would come together for 2 or 3 weeks, and they would paint like mad, and when they weren't painting they were dancing in the hall. And so over possibly 5 years, 2 weeks, that was 10 weeks of painting, and that's how we got our paintings.
Hayden always said, if you want to, we're maybe going to tell this.
No, go on, please.
He'd say, if you want to watch me paint, then you have to dance with me.
Yeah. This is Tom Bueller. Now, this is another story. This flows on from the last one because it was through Hayden who got to know Sir William Gordon Cummings, the local laird of Alta, and he agreed that he'd cut down one of the monkey puzzle trees. And so we're looking at the trunk of a monkey puzzle tree, and as a result of that, we have this magnificent sculpture.
Actually, he invited us out, and we spent a whole day traipsing around the estate looking at various trees that could have enlarged enough.
Really? Yeah.
And in the end, he and Tom jointly decided that the monkey puzzle tree was the one that was best suited.
Well, I think Lyle will tell you we had to take the building to pieces to get it in. And I think this is coming in through the foyer window. Yeah, so we started taking the building down to get the sculpture in. Oh well. Now I'm going to make a slight diversion because on the left is an extraordinary thing. We started making a totally different design for the window, and you can see a diamond lattice effect, which again, Harold, who was an amazing person at welding, he welded the whole lot together. Again, you can see it. Here's Tom carrying the... I think he was the only person I know who could carry a tree.
Another miracle.
This is a quick look at a window that never was. My explanation as to why this window didn't happen was that at that time, Peter was going, and the community was changing its direction. And I think this was going to be possibly too strong a kind of window to put in the hall. In the middle, we dared to put what is Colonel Henderson, who was one of Rock's friends, called it the pattern of truth. However, it was based on a rainbow. Francis and I were walking, and suddenly we turned around, and there was an amazing double rainbow. All right, now I must pay compliments to those who very often we just take for granted. Raymond on the right did enormous amounts of the mechanical services, putting in all the radiators, ventilation systems, and so on. And Michael Shaw, believe it or not, I think he did a lot of the electrics, didn't he?
That's probably Terry on the left there helping with the...
Yeah. I guess they're down in the boiler house. Yes, they are. A lot of you didn't know, but occasionally we had these space beings who arrived. And I clearly remember this occasion. There was this enormous crater after the capsule landed. And I think they came to tell us that we had got the building in the right place. Wasn't that right? Yeah, I think it was saying that we had got the building in the right place, and then off they went. Other people believe this is the septic tank. It actually is. Seats aren't up properly completed, and we've got a temporary covering for the ring beam. Then we put a permanent cover on the ring beam, and it was it was magenta, and it was in keeping with the magenta ray, which I believe the community is Seventh Ray. However, it also didn't last very long, because David Spangler arrived with William Irwin Thompson, and it was torn down. However, what was that?
There was also the story that Hayden came in.
Oh, Hayden.
Hayden came in after the ring beam had been covered.
Yeah, he had a fit.
And he had a quick fit. He said, it goes or the painting.
Yes.
One or the other.
However, you must realize we're all human, and we made some jolly big mistakes occasionally. Wasn't it Peter who said, if you make a mistake, make a big one?
The fabric is now in the nature sanctuary Christians.
Is it? Yeah.
So we want to know what used to be out there.
Well, I must tell you one thing about Hayden, which is to be remembered. He didn't like the natural wood finish in the hall. And he kept on saying to me, I really would like the whole of the roof to be painted white. And I thought, God, how many days, how many months, how many years have we spent brushing and burning that timber, and it's now going to be painted white. Fortunately, Hayden didn't get his way there. Okay, that's the end. Just Mackintosh Patrick came by as a very well-known Scottish artist and sat out in the garden and painted this painting. And the last picture, this is just to show, Lyle said in the book Faces of Findhorn there weren't any drawings. I read that today, Lyle.
Did you?
Yeah. And I just thought I'd show you there was at least one. Okay.